formed football, formed baseball teams, took them to various parts of Boston, and I was able to get the neighborhood youth corps to give me little monies to get some folks to help me. And we were able to get some of these guys into the Job Corps. We also got them into the programs that help get their diploma. So got them there, and ultimately some of those guys, it's amazing how bright they were. One guy, if you could believe this, is a PhD in psychology, if you will, and he grew up in public housing, and he was on his way to nowhere, but he is PhD in psychology.
Do you want to say his name?
Do I want to remember his name? That's the problem, remembering his name. All I remember is that he was in the Cathedral Projects, which is a public housing development up there where they dumped poor black, fewer white folks, but it was just a bad, awful place. And Albert, his first name was Albert, I can't remember his last name, but he was one of the guys who took advantage of the educational offerings, the things we told him about, and he ran with those things. Another fellow, the leader of the group, was about Fledra's height, and yet he was the top dog in the Crusaders. He did not know how to give up. Joe Van Rader, huh?
Van Rader, wasn't it?
Yeah, I just said Joe Van Rader. You remember him. Joe Van Rader did not know how to give up. He would take on a giant because he knew he could not lose. I could tell many stories about Joe and some of the other folks in the group, like the Crusaders just wanted to be a gang, you know, and so we worked real hard, got John and some other folks to give us some money, and we got these sweaters, you know, with the big old C on them, you know. Anyway, through these young men, I met their parents, and my background had told me that the most important thing I could do using community organization theory was to form a group so that people who are being exploited by slumlords could somehow get a better place at housing. And that's what I spent my time doing. The South End Tenants Council is what it was. And one of the ways, I know John would disagree with this, one of the ways I used to have meetings that were full all the time. Before the meetings, especially in the summertime, I would go out and buy cold beer and give participants a can of beer, and also we had a thing where a drawing, you know. If you win the drawing, you got a quart of beer. My attendance was excellent all the time. Not part of the time, I mean all of the time. Well, gentrification raised its ugly head. And this is raw gentrification, where people who had moved to the suburbs, white folks trying to get away from black folks, moved to the suburbs. And things got rough because many of their jobs were in the core of Boston. And there came a time when gas prices had got so high they felt that it would be better to live in Boston near downtown. And so they started moving back. At that time, slumlords, Joe Mendick in particular, were in charge of the housing. And we had to find a way to let these black folks and Puerto Ricans who were living, if you want to call it that, in these tenement buildings, we had to find a way to protect them. And so I got a Harvard student to do research on Joe Mendick, who happened to have been a cantor. And we found that he was a big man in his synagogue. And so we organized a group of about 75 to 100 people to go to this upscale synagogue on a Saturday when they were having a bar mitzvah. And Leon Williams, a fellow who had dropped out of high school, had a great gift of gab. He went up on the podium and he said to Rabbi Korf, we have a complaint against one of your members. And he was talking about the cantor there, Joe Mendick. And Rabbi Korf said, well, if you all would leave as peaceably as you have come in here, I will make sure that justice is done. Within 3 weeks, he had called together the rabbinic court of Boston. And Mendick had his highfalutin lawyer. We had a neighborhood youth court, this neighborhood legal services attorney representing us. He happened to be Jewish too. His name was Goldman. Anyway, for about 3 or 4 weeks, we went back and forth. We were talking about the roaches. We were talking about a baby being bitten by rats. We were talking about all the evil thing that Mendick let his tenement buildings cause problems for folks. And during this time, we had a fellow from MIT, who is a black fellow from MIT. He came to help with the arbitration, if you will. And we came up with a document that was about so thick. That document said what my tenants in the South End Tenants Council would have to do to continue to live without problems in those tenement buildings. They also told Mendick what he had to do to make his buildings amenable for living. For example, the main door into the building, often unlocked, winos from the street, drunk, would go into the buildings to vomit, to use the toilet, and you could imagine the shape that these toilets were in the halls. You could imagine what it was like, the stench. You could smell the things within a block. Awful, just bad stuff. Now he was supposed to take care of that. He was also supposed to make sure there was heat in the buildings in the cold winters, and that the buildings at least had fans in them in the summer. And if he didn't do those things, then the South End Tenants Council was at liberty to begin to collect the rent. By the time we had collected about $200,000, Joe Mendick was ready to sit down and talk with us. And the Boston Redevelopment Authority helped the South End Tenants Council start putting together its housing portfolio. And that went on for years, boy. I just tell one incident. We got the buildings, but we had to manage the buildings too. We didn't have any experience managing anything. So the folks from downtown put several of our people into a management program so that we could take care of. And one of the things we had to do was to be in some of our buildings to make sure that they were not exploited by the hookers who would turn tricks in any place that was not locked up. And I remember very clearly one time, it was my turn to watch a particular building, and darn if I didn't see a John from the suburbs go in with a hooker. I went in. The man had not yet gotten undressed, and I walked into the room. The woman was disrobing. I told her to put her clothes back on, and I told John to get up and get ready to get out. He protested a minute. Now, I'm not a man like John. I don't have patience. So I hit him in his jaw, and he got up. And as we walked down the hall to go out the front door, I told him to take off his shirt, take off his pants. I'm sure he didn't know what I was going to do. When he did that, I rolled him up in a ball and I threw him out a window down into, like, the center of the building was built around a court, and I threw them down there. And we got out in the street, and I knew damn well, before I could say boo, the police were going to be there, and they were. Well, they knew me, and they knew I did crazy things. Well, cop pulled over and, Ted, come over here, we want to talk to you. I said, I want you to arrest that man there. He was just getting ready to commit a crime, fornication. They told me get in the car.
You to get in the car.
I got in the car, went downtown. They roughed me up a little bit, but folks from the South End Settlement House got me out of jail. I was only there for a short time. John was talking about another time I was in jail when I started teaching Black history to the inmates who happened to be mostly black. There was a cement table. That's where we ate lunch. Our lunch was bologna sandwiches with Kool-Aid. Anyway, I taught them about Denmark, VC, just a lot of them. And I wasn't teaching what do you call them? The Panthers were not really that big at that time, so I didn't talk about some of those guys. But the jailers thought that I was trying to get a riot going in there, and they kicked me out. They kicked me out of jail. The very week they kicked me out of jail, the Eastern Massachusetts Association of Social Workers deemed me to be the most effective social worker in Eastern Massachusetts. All from just, well, I did some things that were
not kosher.
Unethical and illegal, I guess. This
But
thing,
my thing is
Development Corporation is
that-
a major thing.
that young people need to know about it and need to know sometimes you got to run outside the track.
oh, bro.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you do. There was a time when Joe Mendick was renovating one of his buildings. He put $3 million in this building, and and it was right on the corner of, it was on a major community, a major corner not far from 48 Rutland Street, where I had my office and John had his office. Well, I had concluded if Mindy got away with having this renovated building here, and these folks from the suburbs now had a place like that to go, it would not be long before that would be happening all over the South End. So I got the South End Tenants Council together and I said, we can't let this happen. Well, what are we going to do? Oh, we're going to take the building. We're going to take the, how are we going to take the building? I said, look, here, you always got to think these things through. Here's what we're going to do. We know the cops will be looking at every move we make. So, let us have a pig picking about 6 blocks